I want to just do a very quick real-time survey of everybody on this call. Can you please put in the chat, do you believe right now, the society you're operating right now, is it more resilient or more fragile than it was 10 years ago? Given that we have been facing this problem for the last 10 years, please put in the chat, just put more fragile or more resilient. Let's just see in our real time where it's going. So if everybody just puts in the chat, let's have a quick look at that. Fragile, 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 slightly more resilient. Good, Barry Blackmore. I'm glad to hear that. Fragile, both. Okay, fragile. Fragile. UK resilience policies are better. Okay, more fragile. I think we have to ask ourselves as a community of people who are supposed to understand this stuff. Why is it that we have 90% people think that we're more fragile than we're more resilient, given that this has been a point of focus for us for the last 10 years? As Louis said, he's been involved in this for 15 years in his own town, in his own city. There's been conscious focus on these issues. So Nuha, I'm going to come to you as the spokesperson for 2,500 governments. Just in terms of general where we are, let's have a start. Let's set the foundation. Where are we right now in terms of maturity, of understanding, of readiness, of support, as Crystal said, of resources, of validation, of acceptance, all of these things? Because of course, there's, however pressing it is, there are multiple competing agendas, and there's very limited resources. I'm sure we've all noticed the world is a tough place out there. It really is. So to try and get these softer things to the top of the agenda is a hard sell. So Nuha, from your perspective, how are we doing? I mean, I'm sure the world is interested, but is the world listening? And are we having those three things? Are we having influence, impact, and legacy? Are we making a difference? What are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I'll try to be as positive as I can, David, with all the gloomy picture that I've seen in the chat as well. But I think what we can say indeed is that we are progressing when it comes into the development of different tools and mechanisms of measuring resilience, and also understanding also the gaps that we have when it comes to the adaptive, absorptive, and transformative capacities. But what we do not have is understanding that at the local community level rather than the institutional level, because most of the tools and resilience measures and all of the innovation that it's coming up, and I think it's really quite advancing and compared to 10 years ago, is really focused on defining indices, also dealing with resilience as figures and numbers, thinking about it in terms of how it's being actually measured from a quantitative, I would say, perspective, and from a numeric values kind of measurements. But what we really need to also think about it is understanding more that resilience assessment also involves a process of identifying how resilience is being created, maintained, and also broken down into the different layers of our society, and then moving from a society level into community level. And that brings me back into that point that I've raised earlier, that it's important that we differentiate between the two of them, because when we speak about the community, we're speaking here about a social unit that have this shared socially values, characteristics, not only the place, but the religion plays a huge, I would say, element when it comes into connecting people together and building that level of solidarity, their values, their customs, their identity, their culture. So all of that comes into this definition of the community beyond a geographical space. And what do we mean by that, and how can we address that? Needs to come into this element of resilience assessment tools and mechanism that we are applying at the city level, but not enough at the community level. Now, if we move from that into the society level, where we are speaking about more of a high level, so here is that where we have clear, I would say, laws and regulations, traditions. You have clear boundaries and political authorities where you can actually, for example, if you are mapping a certain level of vulnerability for a community, you can define that with home addresses, for example, which is not actually the case at the community level. So this differentiation between the different levels is very, very important, because that takes us into the fact that as I mentioned, the resilience is not a single number. It's an emergent property that can be applied in different ways and in different domains. And we need to understand the different contexts behind that. And I'm going to reflect on that with just bringing a very quick example from an existing project that we're currently working on, which is being with the support of the Zurich Foundation and the Alliance, where it's under the title of the Urban Climate Resilience Program. It's being now implemented in around 10 cities across the world. And ICLE in particular is leading on the implementation in the city of Izmir in Turkey. And what we are trying to do there is basically assessing community resilience at the level of two communities which are affected by heat waves and flooding. But what is really interesting about this project, and I'm not just giving it credit being biased here, but what I'm really looking forward to is that following the actual assessment using what we call the CRMC tool, which is the Community Resilience Assessment Tool, we're applying more of a quantitative analysis, but also a qualitative one with focus group discussions, with interviews and understanding context. But once we have reached into a specific resilience solution that is being co-designed with the community and by the community, we do go back a year later, once a specific, I would say, risk have taken place but has been faced by the community. So a certain, for example, heat wave, summer season, we go back to see that did, for example, a solution that has been proposed like an early warning system, did it actually work? Did it make any impact for the communities and help to achieve that transformative impact? And because otherwise, it's nice to put it in our reports and say, okay, the city have developed this early warning system and have came up with all of these, kind of disaggregated data when it comes into understanding hotspots and measuring the cool areas within the city, which we all have these fascinating apps about. But what does it mean for an old lady who are over her 70s, were locked in that place where she does not have an official residency or an address where we can actually reach to her and say, yes, that have made an impact. So yeah, maybe I hope that I've addressed your question, David.
It's interesting because it's fascinating, this idea of the connection between the community and the society, the wider society. And I loved it when you said, you noted down here, that the programs are co-designed with and by the community. And I think that we are seeing an increased awareness that it is the role of central government and other institutes of authority, not to control or direct, but to enable and empower. I think it was very interesting in 2005, Hurricane Katrina, when FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency, tried to respond to Katrina and failed very badly. They reviewed themselves and they said, we made a mistake. We got it wrong. We thought our job as FEMA was to do crisis management. It's not. Our job is to support communities that are doing crisis management. And our job is to support those people. And actually, there's now a change in concept that we talk about first responders. But the first responders is always the community. It's not, the people with the blue lights and the uniforms, they're the second responders. And often the community will have sort of sorted themselves out. So you brought some incredibly, I think, very powerful concepts to the table, which I hope we have time to loop around on.